I'm breaking down 8 players that may be on your league mates rosters that have the potential to break out in a big way in week 1, and you need to go snipe them from your league mates before they do. And I'm not only going to tell you who these 8 players are and why I like each one of them, I'm also going to give you 2 players I think you can trade away for fair value to get these players before they break out in week 1. Now, before I get to those players, I need to remind you, Underdog Fantasy has pick'ems live for week 1 of the NFL slate already. If you're looking for another way to get your fantasy fix on, this is the way to do it. And if you have not tried Underdog Fantasy yet, this is the perfect time because they're going to give all new customers who join using promo code ENDGAME this Travis Kelce new customer special. He just needs to get 1 yard and you win that pick. Just go to UnderdogFantasy.com, join using promo code ENDGAME. Not only are you going to get this Travis Kelce new customer special, but you're also going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000 in cash that you can use right away. The first player you need to try to go out and get if you weren't able to draft him is Kenneth Walker, running back for the Seattle Seahawks. It looks like this guy is going to be a true 3-down running back. When you look at this guy from a fantasy perspective, he's been good but not great. The reason is no pass catching upside. This is a guy on any given week can rip off a long run, can score touchdowns, can do everything you want a running back in fantasy to do except catch passes. But we're hearing from this new staff, this new head coach, new offensive coordinator. They view Kenneth Walker as a 3-down pass catching back. If that is true, Kenneth Walker truly has the upside to be one of the top running backs in fantasy football, and he was kind of an afterthought in your fantasy drafts. I mean, sure, he went as probably an RB2 in your fantasy draft, but he's not a guy people are extremely excited about because he's been very volatile his first 2 years. He's one of those guys, doesn't have the highest floor because, again, no pass catching. But I think you need to go out and get him now before he goes off in week 1, and especially if in week 1 he catches 3, 4, 5 passes, and whoever has Kenneth Walker realizes they have a potential league winner on their hands, then you're not going to be able to get him. It's going to be too late. Now, as far as the players I'd be willing to give up, the first one is Stefon Diggs, wide receiver of the Houston Texans. We cannot expect vintage Stefon Diggs this year. He's over 30 years old. He's now competing with Nico Collins and Tank Dell for targets, not to mention Dalton Schultz, Joe Mixon out of the backfield. Will Stefon Diggs be okay this year? Probably, but Kenneth Walker has the upside to be so much better than Stefon Diggs. And another guy I'd be willing to give up is Davante Adams. Davante Adams still has a ton of value in fantasy. People drafted this guy round 2, round 3, thinking, Davante Adams, they see that name, they see that, he's a stud. But look, he's going to have Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell as his quarterback. Last year took a big hit in yardage, down to 1,100 yards, well over 30 years old now. Kenneth Walker has the upside to be a top 10, top 5 running back if he really is catching passes. So I would be willing to give up one of those wide receivers to go out and get Kenneth Walker as long as I'm deep at the wide receiver position. Now, getting a little deeper here, another running back I think you need to go out and get this week before people wake up to him is Javonte Williams. He's going to be the workhorse running back in this Denver offense, and sure, this Denver offense probably going to be one of the worst. He's not going to score double-digit touchdowns, but what he is going to do is catch a ton of passes because Sean Payton offenses always have ranked top 5 in targets to running backs. Last year, they were number 1 in targets to running backs. And sure, Jaleel McLaughlin is still there, and he's going to get some targets, but Javonte Williams is going to get more targets. This is a guy who could have 50, 60-plus catches. Samaje Perine is gone. Jaleel McLaughlin is not a great pass protector. I don't think he's going to be out there all the time on third downs. Javonte Williams legit has a chance to get over 200 carries this year, catch over 50-plus passes, and people just kind of are off him, not really thinking about him at all from a fantasy perspective. Even if he only gives you, say, 5 touchdowns this year, that's going to be a solid RB2 in fantasy because of that pass catching, because of the volume, and you can get him for very cheap right now because, again, no one is excited about Javonte Williams. So again, a wide receiver I would be willing to give up for Javonte Williams if I was deep at wide receiver is his teammate, Courtland Sutton. Let's do it. Look, this guy was pretty good last year, but it really came off of touchdowns mostly. Do we really think this offense is going to get Courtland Sutton double-digit touchdowns again? I don't think so. I think this is a good time to trade Courtland Sutton. And another wide receiver I'd be willing to give up for Javonte Williams is Keenan Allen. Now, this may surprise a lot of people, but I am not very high on Keenan Allen this year. He's 32 years old. He's now on an offense with DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, a rookie QB, and if preseason is any indication, he's only going to be out there in 3 wide receiver sets, which means he may only be out there 60, maybe 70% of the time. I mean, Keenan Allen, sure, he'll probably be okay this year, but I don't think he's going to have any kind of a ceiling. Give me a guy like Javonte Williams who could absolutely pop off this year, if everything breaks right. And the final running back I want to talk about is Gus Edwards of the LA Chargers. I think we're going to see Gus Edwards score 1, maybe 2 touchdowns this week against the Raiders. I think he's going to be the guy getting the bulk of the touches in this offense. I think he's going to get most or all of the goal line work in this offense. And we know this is going to be a great offense for the run game. Jim Harbaugh, Greg Roman, they're just going to want to run the football relentlessly. They upgraded the offensive line. They've got these tight ends blocking in the running game. You want a piece of this running room, and I'm not worried about J.K. Dobbins. I mean, this guy 2.5 years ago tore his ACL. Last year tore his Achilles. What are we really getting from J.K. Dobbins? Maybe Kimani Vidal comes on as the season goes on, but you can get Gus Edwards for pretty cheap right now. In fact, again, I'm going to recommend trading a wide receiver like Courtland Sutton for Gus Edwards. Talked about it here. Not expecting a big touchdown year from Sutton. Not really expecting a big year from Sutton with Bo Nix in this offense, so I'd be willing to trade him. I'd also be willing to trade DeAndre Hopkins, 32 years old, already has a knee injury. Don't even know if he's going to be out there week 1 or not. Look, most people view Gus Edwards as just kind of like a bench stash running back, but I think this guy can be an every week RB2 with touchdown upside. So if you're deep at wide receiver and light at running back, go try to get Gus Edwards. Let's move on to wide receiver now, and a guy I think could absolutely be a stud this year that people are just kind of not excited about is T. Higgins. Coming off a really down year last year, but look, he battled a bit of injury. Also, Joe Burrow was never right, and then they lost Joe Burrow. I mean, last year was just a wasted year for the Cincinnati Bengals. But you look at T. Higgins this year, he's fully healthy. Most importantly, he's playing on a contract year, essentially, because they franchise tagged him. He's going to want to go out there and show what he can do. And one of my favorite things in fantasy is betting on very talented players who are still in the prime of their careers, who are still in great situations. And I think his situation this year is the best it's been maybe since like his first couple years before Jamar Chase, because Tyler Boyd, who, no, he's not like a target magnet, but a reliable wide receiver 3 is gone. Joe Mixon out of the backfield. He's gone. I think we could see T. Higgins get many more targets this year. I think we could see this offense just be Jamar Chase, T. Higgins getting all the targets, similar to what we see in Miami, similar to what we see in Philadelphia. There's no reason T. Higgins can't be a high upside wide receiver 2, and he wasn't drafted that way, and he's not being viewed that way. So maybe you have a deep running back room, you went running back heavy, and now you're like, hey, I need a wide receiver. I'd be willing to trade Joe Mixon straight up for T. Higgins. I think Joe Mixon is going to be fine this year in that Houston offense, but I don't think he's going to be as good as we saw in Cincinnati. I'd also be okay trading a guy like Aaron Jones in that Vikings offense. A lot of people kind of excited about Aaron Jones in that Vikings offense. He was good last year, but again, I don't think Aaron Jones is going to be a guy you're going to look back on at the end of the season and be like, man, I'm so glad I have Aaron Jones. I think you could say that about T. Higgins. And then a wide receiver I talked up all offseason, Chris Godwin. I think you still got to go out and try to get him right now if you can. We know this guy is going to play way more in the slot. The offensive coordinator, the head coach, already talking about it. In the preseason, we already saw it, over 60% of his snaps from the slot. This is where Chris Godwin dominated for 3 straight years. Remember, he was a wide receiver 2 one year, averaged 16 points per game, 17 points per game, 19 points per game. I think he can get back to those levels this year playing out of the slot, and right away in week 1, he could go off because they get the Washington Commanders, who might have one of the worst secondaries in the NFL this year. And if he goes off in week 1, it's going to be much harder to go out and get him. So now is the time to try to go out and kick Chris Godwin, because people just view him as like, yeah, okay, fine. It's like round 6 and he's on the board. I guess I'll take him. They're not very excited about him. And again, if you're deep at running back, you drafted running back heavy, or maybe running backs just fell to you, I'd be willing to trade a guy like David Montgomery for Chris Godwin. Very similarly valued right now. I know a lot of people like David Montgomery in this Lions offense, but if Jahmyr Gibbs is really going to be worth his first round pick, it means David Montgomery is probably going to take a hit. Will he score a decent amount of touchdowns in this offense? Sure. But outside of that, what is he really going to give you? And I'd also be willing to trade DeAndre Swift. I'm very worried about this Bears backfield being a 3-headed committee. I'm very worried that DeAndre Swift is going to disappoint in fantasy this year. So again, if you're deep at running back, you drafted DeAndre Swift, you need wide receiver help, go try to get Chris Godwin. And then I think you need to try to go get second-year wide receiver Jaxon Smith-Njigba right now while you can. Yes, I love DK Metcalf this year, but I also really like JSN. This offense is going to be so different. They're going to run more motion, more play action. In fact, in the preseason, only the Dolphins ran more pre-snap motion than the Seattle Seahawks. JSN is going to be in the slot. They're going to move him around. They're going to move him around before the snap. These are all good things for the passing game. It's been proven that passer ratings go up significantly when players are in motion before the snap, and players in motion before the snap get targeted at a much higher rate. I think we're going to see DK Metcalf as the number 1 here, and I think we're going to see JSN as the number 2. I know Tyler Lockett is back, but I mean, he took a pay cut. He's 32 years old. He didn't look that good last year. I really think it's going to be DK Metcalf, JSN getting the bulk of the targets, and JSN is one of these guys that people drafted again because it's like, well, it's round 8 or whatever, and there's nobody else good here. Let's just take JSN and see what happens. Well, don't let him see what happens in week 1 if this guy goes off. Instead, try to go get him. A couple running backs I'd be willing to trade. Again, if you're deep at running back, Tony Pollard. Not really feeling a great Tony Pollard season this year. I think he'll be fine in this Tennessee offense, but Tyjae Spears there, they're going to want to throw the ball more. So if I could trade Tony Pollard for JSN, I would do it. I would also trade Zach Moss for JSN, kind of being valued similarly. People looking at this like Zach Moss, the RB1 in Cincinnati, and he might be the RB1 in Cincinnati, but Chase Brown isn't like just going away here. He's going to have a role, and look, eventually if Chase Brown is better, he might have a bigger role than Zach Moss. So I'd be willing to trade either of these running backs to get a guy like JSN. And then how about a rookie wide receiver like Xavier Worthy? Was very undervalued in drafts this year, went very late, but I mean, this guy has what you're looking for a wide receiver in fantasy. He's a burner. This guy ran under a 4.440, one of the fastest wide receivers. He's playing with Patrick Mahomes. He's in this Andy Reid offense. They are going to use this guy as a deep threat from the slot more than likely. He is going to have multiple weeks this year where he catches huge gains, huge touchdowns. And I don't know if it's because he's a rookie. I don't know if he's because he wasn't super hyped up as a draft prospect, but really people are not very high on him right now. And look, in week 1, the Chiefs are going to need this guy because Hollywood Brown isn't playing. It's going to be Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, and Travis Kelce here. So look, if he goes out there in week 1, catches a 50-yard touchdown and gets 3 or 4 more catches, yeah, the cat's out of the bag. Everybody's going to know about Xavier Worthy, and it's going to be way too late. So go try to strike now before that happens. And again, I'm going to say the same running backs here. Zach Moss, Tony Pollard, either of those guys can get you Xavier Worthy right now, about where they were being drafted. Very similar values here. So if you drafted Moss or Pollard and you're like, I have a ton of running backs and I need some upside wide receiver help, go try to get Xavier Worthy. And then finally, I'm going to try to help some of you who are in those leagues where everybody drafts 2 or 3 quarterbacks and maybe you ended up stuck with like Baker Mayfield or Matthew Stafford as your QB1, which like it's fine, but not ideal. Let's go try to get a low-hanging fruit at QB like Tua. I think Tua was being massively undervalued in drafts this year. I think this guy has tremendous upside. He led the league in passing last year. Now, sure, only 23 touchdowns, but that's because his running back scored a zillion touchdowns. That's probably not going to happen again. There's a good chance he goes 30-plus touchdowns this year. Looks like Jalen Waddle is good to go. He's back at practice, fully practicing. Tyreek Hill, good to go. They added rookie Malik Washington. He's got weapons here. I think Tua could be one of the leaders in passing again, but this time reach 30-plus touchdowns. So if you're like, yeah, I'm stuck with like Stafford or Baker Mayfield or whoever, go get a low-hanging fruit with Tua. And again, I'm going to say you could probably trade a running back like Zach Moss and get Tua. I mean, if you got too many running backs and the person with Tua has not enough because they drafted 2 or 3 quarterbacks, because that's what people do, go offer him Zach Moss for Tua. I think you can also offer Najee Harris for Tua. I do like Najee Harris, but I mean, let's be real. How good is Najee Harris really going to be? Like, he's going to be solid, right? That's pretty much it. If you are stuck with a bad quarterback situation, you're deep at running back, you got Najee Harris, go see if that'll get Tua on your fantasy team. So those are the 8 players you need to be trying to trade for right now before they go off here in week 1 and it's too late. But what about everything else? Running back starts it, QB, tight end, wide receiver. Who's going to go off this week and help you win your matchups? Well, you can find all of that in our week 1 playlist right here.